Okay, let's begin with an opening prayer. Since you're all muted, if you could just follow along silently, that'd be great. This is the Serra prayer for vocations. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. O God, who wills not the death of a sinner, but rather that he be converted and live, grant, we beseech you, through the intercession of Blessed Mary, ever Virgin, Saint Joseph, her spouse, Saint Junipero Serra, and all the saints, an increase of laborers for your church, fellow laborers with Christ, to spend and consume themselves for souls through the same Jesus Christ, your Son, our Lord, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen. Okay, again, welcome to everybody. This is spring officer training for club officers, and this is part one. There are 3 parts, and each part there are different options. So we're on the Thursday option here. I'll just point out to you real briefly that we tend to follow kind of a similar pattern for when these are scheduled. It goes Monday at noon Central, Thursday at 7 p.m. Central, and then Saturday at 9 a.m. Central. Now, Dr. Ann Rote and I are kind of sharing responsibilities, so the links for each of these may be different, but the times will be there, and they should send out some kind of invitation to you that has the correct link. The link for the next one on Saturday is going to be Dr. Ann Rote's link. So, and then there's going to be 3 of these, but they always follow the Monday, Thursday, Saturday progression there. So, okay, we're going to begin with an overview of Serra and U.S. Vocations. This is a great picture. Ann pulled this up and actually put together all these slides for me, so it's just great this year. This is a parish, and I wish I knew the parish. I think it's in Tennessee or Kentucky, but it is one parish that has had a priest ordained every single year since 2013, which is pretty impressive. That's, you can't see 2013, but that's 6 priests in 6 years from the same parish. And that's sort of an overarching goal of what we're going to try and do here. Okay, let's turn to our mission statement. It's simple and elegant. To foster and affirm vocations to the ordained priesthood and vowed religious life, and through this ministry, grow in our own Catholic faith. Actually, there are 3 distinct missions embedded in this simple paragraph. The first one is to foster new vocations to the priesthood and religious life. The second is to affirm and support existing vocations. And the third is to increase our own holiness in doing so. These are the touchstones of everything that we do in Serra. Every set of prayers, programs, meetings, activities should be able to tie back to one of these in particular, at least one of these in particular. So this is the goal of what we're trying to do here. And it's important that a club work to support all 3 missions. It's a lot, some are more fun, more easier than others. I think the easiest one of all is the second mission, which is to affirm existing vocations. We do that through appreciation events for priests, sisters, bishops, seminarians, and the feedback is really great. Those people just love the support that we give, and you get immediate feedback, and it's all positive. If you contrast that with our first mission statement, to foster new vocations, you know, the masses that we say, the rosaries we pray, the hours in adoration, we may not see the fruits of those prayers for a year, a decade, or even ever. But we have to have faith that those prayers are working. And we know that they work because Jesus said, pray to the Lord of the harvest to send more laborers to gather the harvest. So you have to let that faith sustain you when you don't have the positive feedback there. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about the person for whom our organization is named, St. Junipero Serra. He is famous for a statement in one of his letters back to his parents saying, always forward, never back. And this is kind of a thumbnail sketch of his life. He was born in 1713 in Majorca, Spain, which is a small island off the Spanish coast. At age 16, he joined the Franciscans. And then at age 36, he volunteered to go to the New World as a missionary and work initially in the missions in Mexico. At age 56, he began establishing the missions in California, which is the work for which he is most famous. He died in 1784 at the age of 70 in California, and it's said that he traveled over 24,000 on foot as a missionary. You'll hear how incredible that is when we talk a little bit about his life. And he was canonized on September 2015 in the US, and his feast day is celebrated July 1st of every year. So that's kind of a thumbnail sketch of his life. But because you are Serrans, there's 4 things I want you to know about Father Serra. First, he chose to be humble in his service at great cost to himself. It's easy to miss the fact that for the first half of his life, Father Serra was not a missionary at all. In fact, by age 35, he had become a renowned professor of philosophy and theology at Lulean College in Spain. And yet, at age 35, he hears this call to go and be a missionary in the New World. And he gives up this kind of cushy life that he has for a life of hardship, uncertainty, and danger. But he never let any of that stop him. It just tells you how important to him his commitment to God's call was. The second thing to know is that Father Serra suffered almost constant pain during the entire time that he was a missionary. When he first landed on the coast of Mexico, he set off on foot to go to Mexico City, which was 250 miles away. Along the way, he was bitten by either an insect or a serpent, and his whole leg became infected and swollen, covered with ulcers on the lower half. This wound never healed, and in fact, twice during his missionary work, it brought him close to death. So he had pain the whole way, but he never let that bother him, and it puts the 24,000 miles that he walked or was on the back of a mule in an amazing light there. Third, he believed in the power of persistent prayer. There's a great story about Father Serra. When he set off to do the California missions, the expedition ran into severe difficulties right off the bat, and they failed to rendezvous with the supply ship. And they ran out of food, they ran out of ammunition, and the soldiers were suffering from pestilence and disease. The commander made a decision to turn back at that point and abandon the mission. But Father Serra talked to him into staying for 9 days until the Feast of St. Joseph. And during that time, he had the Franciscans start a continuous novena of prayer to St. Joseph. On the 9th day, the Feast of St. Joseph, at 12 o'clock or at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the sails of the supply ship were spotted, and the journey that led to the establishment of all the missions in California was allowed to continue. All because Saint Serra believed in the power of persistent prayer. And finally, I want you to know that he was a tremendous advocate for the indigenous people at the time. I don't think Father Serra was well liked by the Spanish authorities, by the Spanish military, or the Spanish colonists. He constantly intervened between them and the indigenous people to prevent their exploitation, and he almost always won. Just realize that we have a tremendously powerful advocate in heaven for our vocations work here in Serra. Let's talk for a second about the history of the Serra organization. Serra began in 1935, and it was started by 4 lay Catholics in Seattle, Washington. In 1951, a very significant event occurred. Serra became an official apostolate aggregated to the Catholic Church. In fact, Serra is the only lay apostolate officially aggregated to the Church for vocations work. That means that we are part of and work under the direction of the Vatican. At all times, we have a cardinal assigned for oversight and guidance. But that being said, it's important to realize that Serra does not have an exclusivity on vocations work. In fact, our role is to be leaders in the vocations effort, and we do that 3 ways. First, we lead by our own efforts within our clubs of prayer, service, and fellowship. Second, we lead by encouraging and supporting vocations efforts of other Catholic lay organizations, like Parish Vocations Ministries and the Knights of Columbus, who do terrific work for vocations. These folks are not competitors. They are our teammates, and we need to do everything we can to make their efforts successful. And third, we lead by engaging all Catholics, even those who may never become Serrans, to pray for vocations and create a culture of vocations in our parishes and dioceses. Let's look at the organization of Serra International. Serra has about 12,500 members worldwide in about 400 clubs in 46 different countries. Serra is organized primarily into 10 geographic councils, of which the U.S. Council is only one. It has the Episcopal advisor. Our cardinal that's assigned to us at the current time is Cardinal Tom Collins from Toronto, Canada. Our president is Kurt Medico from Texas. Our president-elect is Moira McQueen from Toronto. And in addition, Serra International has an executive director, a young man named John Liston, who himself is a former seminarian. And John has a staff of 2 full-time employees and 2 part-time employees. John actually is the executive director for not only Serra International, he is the executive director for the Serra Foundation and for the USA Council. So he really wears 3 hats, and he reports to 3 different boards. And the board, I want to mention here too, is made up of representatives from each of the councils and the key officers in the organization there. I want to say one other thing about John and his staff in Chicago. They are the only folks in Serra that receive a salary for their Serra work. Everything else is done by volunteers. This is a little bit of an overview, financial overview of Serra International. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but there's kind of 3 points I'd like to make for you. One is, and the main point is that we're fiscally sound and fiscally managed very well. Our goal is pretty much to break even every year. We're not in the money-making business. And you can see there, if you look from 2020 to 2023 actuals, that we were roughly at a break even for each of those years. We have no interest-bearing debt, and we do have an ending cash balance that is sufficient, I think, to handle most of the needs of the organization at this particular time. So again, we're break even, we have no debt, and we've got a pretty good cash balance to work with. I'd like to just say a few words about the value that Serra International brings to local clubs. It's important to remember that our mission is to the worldwide Catholic Church, not just to the church in the U.S. And I think it's easy for Serra clubs in the U.S. to forget that sometimes. So what Serra International does is it spreads the Serra model to areas of the world where there is no vocation effort and adapts it as necessary for the local culture. Serra International also brings Serrans together once a year at an international convention. And these are great opportunities to get together with Serrans from around the world. It's very spiritual, wonderful liturgies, lots of information and inspiring speakers. Just a great event there. And I'm going to flip ahead 1 slide just to tell you about the upcoming Serra International conventions. We have one that's going to happen relatively soon, August of 2024 this year. It's the Serra International Convention that will be held in New Orleans. And then next year, our Serra International Convention is scheduled to take place in Kansas City, Missouri in June of 2025. Let me just go back and finish up on this slide in terms of value. And the one last thing that Serra does that's very important is that it coordinates our activities with the worldwide priorities of the Vatican, again, reflecting the fact that we are a worldwide apostolate of the Catholic Church. So that's a little bit about Serra International. I'm going to spend just a few minutes talking about the Serra Foundation here. The Serra Foundation is the grant-giving arm of Serra, and while it's an independent entity, it's essentially managed through Serra International. Its mission closely parallels the mission of Serra International itself. So their mission is to fund programs that foster new vocations, to fund formation programs for men and women in consecrated religious life, existing vocations, and to enhance the recognition of Serra International. This just is a little bit of an overview of the foundation, but since 2005, the foundation has given over $3 million in grants to advance our Serra mission. As of the end of 2023, the foundation had $2.8 million in assets invested, and those are all invested according to US CCB standards, to our bishop standards. And to give you a feel, the donations that were received by the foundation in 2023 totaled $523,000. Now, I should mention that 2023 was a little bit unusual there. We had 2 things going on. One is that we did a fundraiser for the Eucharistic Congress to support them, and that was $150,000. And then in addition to the normal donations that are received, which I would say are usually in the ballpark of $175,000 to $200,000, We also had some bequests from some wills that were given to the foundation for future use. So a lot of good things happening from the foundation. This gives you a little bit of a flavor for the grants that have been paid in the last few years. These range between about 70,000 and 130,000. And you can see there that they split between US organizations and organizations in other countries. And that's pretty standard. I would mention that there are organizations in other countries that count for the US. One would be the North American College in Rome, which is the seminary that the bishops in the United States and Canada use for North American seminarians. Usually they're the biggest receivers of a grant, and they receive about $25,000 a year. Another example would be the Institute for Priestly Formation in Omaha, Nebraska, and they receive about $10,000 every year. And then the other grants are just spread amongst, some actually go to clubs, some go to convents and seminaries, and some go overseas. So they do just great work for our vocations and the missions all around the world. One thing about the Serra Foundation that I want you to remember, a lot of our clubs forget this. We think about it as just a place to make contributions to, but the reality is it's also a place to look for grant opportunity. So if you have in your club area seminaries or convents or houses of formation, and even if your diocesan vocations office has a fairly creative program, you should encourage them to apply for a grant. And that's all done online now, and it's done once a year. It has to be done by September 30th of every year. And then the decisions are made in November and the grants are given the next year there. But be sure to keep that in mind if you have organizations that you think might be able to take advantage of that. So that's a little bit about the foundation. I'll say one last thing. Every year, Serrans will receive a letter from the foundation asking them to make a contribution. And I really encourage all Serrans to make some contribution, no matter how small. You just can't believe the good that we can do, especially overseas, with just a little bit of money there. So it's an easy and convenient way to meet our obligation to the worldwide Catholic Church and its vocations work. Okay, we're going to drop down from the Serra International and look at the U.S. Council. Remember, I said that the U.S. Council is one of 10 councils in the world. We are the largest, and we have, I said there are about 12,500 or 13,000 Serrans worldwide. 7,800 of those Serrans are in the U.S., and that's not surprising since Serra started in the U.S. And there are about 194 clubs at present in the U.S. that are operating. The U.S. is organized into 9 geographic regions, and they're shown on this map, each in a different color. Each of those regions has a regional director. And then within the region, within each region is organized by districts or groups of clubs that are relatively close together in terms of geography. Each district has a district governor. And the district governors are really a key part of the interface between clubs on one hand and Serra US and Serra International on the other. And a district governor's job is not to run a club or have a club report to it. It is to be an advisor and to assist in informing them about what the priorities of Serra are at any one time and best practices. Just like Serra International, there is a board that governs the U.S. Council. And the board is made up of each of the 9 region directors plus the officers. And the officers include president, a president-elect, 4 or 5 vice presidents now. We have a vice president for vocations, a vice president for communications, a vice president for programs, and a vice president for membership. And then a relatively new one that we've added is a vice president for cultural outreach. So that makes up the board in the U.S. here. Just like we did for Serra International, I'd like to give you a little financial overview because the U.S. Council of Serra is a separate entity, but the same things hold true. We basically operate at a break-even level. That's our goal. We have a healthy ending cash balance as of this point, and we have no interest-bearing debt. So I think all signs that we're managed in a fiscally responsible manner. Let's talk about the value the U.S. Council brings to Serra clubs. Probably the most important one is that it is the repository of the wisdom of Serra through the years. We have training programs for officers, club officers. We have training programs for district governors and regional directors, and we have vocations programs that clubs can download and use with parishes in the areas where they cover. So there's quite a bit of information that Serra has, and it's one of the keys, and we constantly update that information too. We'll talk about that in just a second. Second, it's a place for new ideas and problem solving to be taken on. So we have a national convention. It's in the U.S. It's called the U.S. Serra Rally, and it takes place once a year in January. And it is a 2-day workshop of intense. We have inspirational speakers, great liturgies, and a lot of training that goes on there. And it is just a wonderful place for leaders in Serra, both above the club level and at the club level. A lot of club presidents attend that, come together and discuss and kind of see the bigger picture of Serra. That's one of the really nice things about the rally and the Serra International conventions, is it gives people a chance to see that they are part of something much bigger than just a club. And that's important, especially sometimes with all the challenges that we have in the vocations area. A third value that the council brings to Serra clubs is to communicate the vocation priorities of the U.S. bishops. And right now, there are 4 vocations priorities that the bishops have asked Serra clubs to focus on. The first one is to support vocation awareness programs with materials and programs that are ready to go in parishes and dioceses. And the vocations awareness programs are keyed around the 4 big vocations events in the year, which are Priesthood Sunday in September, National Vocations Awareness Week, which is the first week of November, World Day for Consecrated Prayer, which is the first weekend that follows February 3rd, and World Day of Prayer for Vocations, which actually just happened here last weekend, which always happens on Good Shepherd Sunday. In addition, there's a couple of new awareness programs that are out there that clubs are supporting. One is a National Sisters Week, which takes place in the spring, and one is Religious Brothers Day, which takes place May 1st every year. So that's the first priority that the bishops have for us, is to support parishes in celebrating those vocation awareness events. The second one is the Newman Ministry. Newman was actually, this effort was actually started by Serra. It used to be called the College Connection for Catholics, and it's intended to try and keep young people connected with their faith when they go to college. And that's important for a couple of reasons. One is that young people tend to fall away from the faith when they go to college, but at the same time, college age is about the most ripe time for these folks to hear a vocations calling. So the bishops think it's a very important program. And the way it works is that Serra clubs collect information on graduating high school Catholics, both from Catholic high schools and from RE programs. And they supply those names and the colleges the kids are going to the Newman database. Newman has a database with over 5,000 colleges in North America now. And the database has for every college, the Catholic youth ministry, or if there is no Catholic youth ministry, the local parish. And what they do is they forward that information to them, and those people make an immediate connection with the kids when they come to college to try and keep them alive in the faith there. And then a third priority, which is relatively new, and this is more from the vocations directors than from the bishops themselves, but they have asked us, Serra, if we would help with parish vocation ministry training. And so we put together a program called Ignite. And what Ignite is that if a bishop or a diocese invites us to come and can pull together 3 to 5 parishes, and from within those parishes, 3 to 5 people each, we'll come in and do a day of training. Usually we have 2 Serrans that do that. I've done a lot of those trainings in different places around the country, but the goal is to get parish vocations ministry started. And the real goal is to expose them to all the vocations programs that Serra has to offer. And the fourth priority of the U.S. bishops, they've asked us to develop a kind of a digital resources set for vocations directors. And the result has been the serraspark.org website. It has 31 programs at the current time, vocations programs, and it was designed specifically for vocations directors to be able to pull down the digital format, quickly adjust it to a parish or a diocese, and use it in their vocations work. It's important to realize that 1/3 of vocations directors are new in their position every year, and there really isn't any training that takes place for vocations directors. They're usually plucked from a high school or a parish and just kind of thrown into this job. So what Serra Spark does and what Serra does is it makes it possible for those people to be effective right off the bat. So those are the 4 priorities that the U.S. bishops have for Serra. And then finally, it's worth noting that the office staff provides professional support for the volunteer clubs, and that includes maintaining all the websites. And I just mentioned here too that there is a free liability insurance certificate for clubs when they have vocations events that require some kind of liability insurance. These are event limited only, but there's an unlimited number per club. There are a lot of places now, whether it's a parish hall or it's a cathedral or whatever it is, that require liability insurance that names both the parish and the diocese as co-insurers. And you can do that with these insurance certificates. And if you have any questions on that, you can contact the office or John Liston, and he can tell you how to do that. Okay, this is kind of just a basic slide that we put in here, so you have this in your reference materials. But these are the current semi-annual dues. So these are the dues for every 6 months. When a new member joins, there's an initiation fee of $12.75, and that covers a new member kit that includes a prayer for vocations card, a pin, member pin, a welcome letter, and a new member certificate. And it also includes the Call to Holiness book, which was just recently redone. It's really good. Then for regular members, the dues are $50 every 6 months. And you can see how that splits out there between Serra International and US Serra, pretty much evenly there. And if their spouses are under 35, I think most of you know, it's half of that amount, or $25. So Serra International handles the invoicing for both Serra International and the US. They send out an invoice to every club in June and December, and they hope to have payment back by July 15th or January 15th. So that's just a little bit about the dues. And then a lot of people ask what you get for your dues. We've already talked about some of the value that both Serra International and US Serra bring to the clubs. But these are just some things that most people don't think about. One is the Newman College connection. We're a big supporter of that. The serraspark.org website, which is for vocations directors, but is used widely by Serra clubs themselves, using the vocations programs and tools that are listed there. The Ignite training that's done for free all around the country is paid for by dues. We have the new 7 Serrans prayer teams for vocations directors. And I'm hoping most of you are familiar with that, but about 3 years ago, Serra decided that we needed to pray for every vocations director in the country for 1 hour each day by name. And the way that's done is we have 7 Serrans prayer teams that are organized all over the country. Each Serran takes a day of the week and agrees to pray for a particular vocations director on that day for a year. So it's a wonderful program. There's some great notes we've gotten back from vocations directors talking about how great it makes them feel to know somebody's got their back with prayers, and sometimes how much those prayers help with the stress of being a vocations director. We also use our dues to build partnerships with the US CCB, that's the US Council of Catholic Bishops, NCDVD, which is the National Conference of Diocesan Vocations Directors, Focus, which I think a lot of you are aware, that's the college ministry group that goes into colleges, volunteers for 2 years, and evangelizes on campus. NCYC, which is the youth group, and a lot more like the Young Catholic Professionals. And we also pull in Serra Meets. And We also threw in here that we do, it's easy to forget, but we do the Serra magazine that's mailed to every Serra household quarterly, and a lot of the programs and materials that are provided for clubs to use in membership and vocations. Okay, that's the big picture of Serra. Are there any questions anybody has here? There's a question here from Wendy Collins asking, where do you find the grant applications for the Serra International Foundation? Those can be found online, Wendy. In fact, that's the only place you can process the application is online. And I think if you go to serrainternational.org, you'll find those there. But if not, just go back to the homepage for serraus.org and you can find it through that too. We've got a lot of material to cover tonight, so I'm going to keep plowing on. Just remember, if you do have a question, unmute yourself and just dive in. I'll stop. Okay, let's go and look at the, we've looked at the big picture of Serra. Let's look at the big picture for vocations in the U.S. The long and the short here is that we face an incredible shortage of priests, and it is a crisis, and it's growing, and it's going to get worse. Now, there's a lot of good things happening. We've had a pretty steady number of new priest ordinations and graduate level seminarians since 1995 and 2000. I'm going to flip ahead here to a graph that shows you that. Now, a lot of people look at this graph and they get discouraged because they see what it was back in 1965 and 1970, and you can see we had a big fall off there. But really, since about 1985, we've had a pretty steady number. The two lines to watch here are the solid one and the gray one, not the dotted one. That's high school seminaries, and they're not very relevant anymore. But we've had a pretty steady number there, and I think that's pretty impressive if you think about how the environment for the church has changed at this point. You know, back in the 60s and 70s, our country was still a country that was based on Judeo-Christian ethics and values. Something happened in the 70s and 80s, and those kind of have been tossed by the wayside. So I heard one person describe it as in the 60s and 70s, we had this strong tailwind. And then all of a sudden, the 80s and the 90s, we got this huge headwind that we're trying to face. So having a steady number of priests, I think, is very impressive, and a steady number of major seminarians too. Let me go back to my slide here. The long and the short, though, is this. Even though there's been a steady number of priests, it's nowhere near the number needed to replace the priests that are dying or retiring. If you look at the demographics of the priests that are out there right now, it's almost scary looking at the next 10 years. We have so many priests that are in the 60 to 70-year-old age range. And so you're going to see a decline in priests that's going to accelerate here, I think. And if you add to that the fact that the U.S. Catholic population is up by almost 58% since 1965, you get an idea of why our work with vocations is so important to the church. One area that's worth noting that's a particularly dire need right now is that the need for Hispanic priests. 35% of all U.S. Catholics identify as Hispanic. In fact, if you look at the numbers under, I think, 22, 50% of the church now identifies as Hispanic. But only 14% of the priests are Hispanic, and many of those are not born in this country. So we have a church that's evolving into a bicultural institution, and what we need are American-born Hispanics to become priests who can serve both cultures effectively. This is a table that just shows you how steady the decline has been in the total number of priests, even though the total number of new priests has been almost dead on since 1995. But you can see here that we've gone from 32,000 diocesan priests in 1995, and it just keeps dropping every year that's recorded here down to 24,000. That's a pretty significant loss of priests in that period of time. Okay, there are some things that I think you should know if you want to be an effective Serran about vocations. And these are mostly from a book called A Priest in the Family by Father Brett Brannon. The most important one is the first one. That's the Holy Spirit that calls the vocation, not us. So What we need is a culture of vocations in parishes and dioceses so that the call can be heard. And that is what Serrans are supposed to do, is create that culture of vocations. Another point is that all the evidence shows overwhelmingly that the key influencers for new priests deciding to become priests are other priests that suggested that they have a vocation. We also have discovered that the time of most serious consideration is age 17, and that's why the Catholic bishops are so keen on the Newman mission, to keep college kids connected with their faith when they go to college there. Time spent in Eucharistic adoration is identified as critical by a number of new priests, and for that to happen, there has to be Eucharistic adoration, and that's something that Serrans can support. 60% of priests were altar servers. And this is the reason that a lot of clubs have altar server award and recognition programs. But it's a very important, we know that's a rich environment for future vocations there. On average, 50% of seminarians discern out. Now that's not a failure, that's actually the discernment process working the way it should, so that people understand the correct call God's making for their lives. But I will tell you this, the ones that discern out, they often become some of the most powerful lay leaders in the church. I can tell you in my own diocese, there are 5 people holding key roles under the bishop, and all 5 were seminarians that I prayed for when they were in seminary at the time. They've obviously dropped out, but they're still doing God's work in a really powerful way. 92% of priests are happy being a priest. Now, being a priest is a lot more than a career as such, but there's no other career that comes anywhere close to that kind of satisfaction level. And finally, this is an important point for a lot of people. Celibacy, or the inability to marry, is not the cause of the priesthood shortage. And we know that because mainline Protestant churches have the same ministerial shortages. They face the same issues that we do, and they're just as severe. I think too many Catholics think that allowing priests to marry is the silver bullet to solve this problem. The only real silver bullet is going to be prayer and creating a culture of vocations so that a call can be heard. I have one last slide, and then we'll take a break here in terms of overview of vocations. I want to talk to you about an organization we get a lot of questions about. It's called the Labore Society. There's a big problem in the US with a number of young people that go to college and at the point of graduation decide that they may have a calling, and when they go to follow that up, they apply, but they can't get in because they have amassed huge student loan debts. So how do you deal with that problem? The Labore Society came into being to try to help with that, and actually I would say 50% of the members of the Labore Society are Serrans. But basically what we do is we teach those people by mentoring about cash management and debt alleviation. Prospects are trained on how to reach out to individuals, oftentimes Serrans, for contributions. But the contribution goes not to the individual, but to the Labore Society. And then the individuals receive kind of a credit for the contributions that they stir up. But Labore actually allocates money to help different people alleviate their debt so that they can go on to study to be a priest or a sister. So what that does is it makes the Labore Society contributions are tax deductible. So it's just an organization you should be aware of if you hear about it, and know that they're partners with us. We're great teammates. In a lot of ways, we're almost the same organization. Okay, that's an overview of U.S. vocations. Any questions or comments there?
Okay. Are these slides on the website that we could go back to and refer to?
Let me just tell you, if you're ever looking for stuff in Serra, I know sometimes people get frustrated using the website. If you go to serraus.org, that's our homepage website for the U.S. Council. Across the top, there's 4 or 5 tabs. One of those tabs is called Leadership. If you click on that, there's a drop-down menu, and it says Club Officers, District Governors. And if you go to that page, that's a page that I created myself. It's got about 40 different, it's got all the training sessions recorded. It does have these slides in PowerPoint format, or it will. And it also has almost every anything that everybody's ever asked me for, I put on that page. So member induction ceremonies, officer installations, information about the vocations, the CARA studies behind the vocations numbers, all those things are there, and anybody's free to use any of those at any time. So, okay, let's talk about how clubs operate and event planning calendars. First, about how clubs work. Clubs are chartered by Serra International. They're governed by their bylaws, and they have a club number that's unique to them. They're organized by geographic areas within a diocese, but they are organized by diocese, not by parishes. And that means that Serra clubs work with and for the bishop and the vocations director. They are our bosses. The focus of all Serra clubs usually includes a combination of prayer, fellowship, and service. This is a point I like to make because I think people that aren't familiar with Serra don't realize this, but vocations recruitment is not the primary function of a Serra club. We do have Serrans that on occasion go up and ask individual young people on a one-on-one basis if they've thought about being a priest or a sister. And that's fine, but remember that our real function, a critical function, is to create a culture of prayer, a culture of vocations through prayer in a parish and a diocese. So that's the real goal of Serra here. And then you can see there that the typical year goes from July 1st to June 30th. That's not required, but that's true of most clubs. And it's also true for Serra International and Serra US. Let's talk about club bylaws. I just mentioned those. Bylaws are usually problems for me. I get a lot of questions on bylaws. The reason is that a lot of clubs have lost their bylaws. They're really old. And even if they could find them, they'd find out that the bylaws no longer reflect how the club truly operates. There's been a lot of changes there that haven't been reflected in the bylaws. And there's also been some changes in terms of maintaining nonprofit status of the clubs. There's language that is best if it is included in the bylaws. I don't think it would make you lose your nonprofit status if it wasn't there, but the IRS might require you to put it in if they ever looked at it. That's highly unlikely. But anyway, the main point here is that there's a new model club bylaws that have been approved by the U.S. Council. And again, if you go back to that website that I talked about and that particular tab, it's serraus.org. That's the home page. Click on leadership. There's a drop-down menu for club officers, district governors, and on that page, you'll see the new model club bylaws. And what those mean is that if you adopt those bylaws word for word, there's no issue. They're just approved automatically. Otherwise, you're asked to send in your bylaws and just get kind of a formal approval, okay, that they're consistent with the Serra International bylaws. Okay. Let's talk about how clubs are structured. It's pretty much the way you'd think. The board is made up, it's a board of trustees, and it's made up of current and former officers. And then there's a group of active officers, the president, hopefully a president-elect, and an immediate past president. Then there are vice presidents of standing committees, and there are usually 4 standing committees, and now a lot of clubs have added a 5th one. I'll talk about that, but there's a vice president of vocations, a vice president of programs, a vice president for membership, a vice president for communications, and the new one is the vice president for cultural outreach. I'll just comment real briefly there is that Serra has not kept up with the demographic changes within the Catholic Church. So we have a very poor representation of Hispanics and other minorities in Serra. And what we're trying to do is to strengthen the culture of vocations in the Hispanic Catholic community to get Hispanics to pray for vocations from their own community, and the same with other minorities as well. And then there's usually a secretary and a treasurer. There are trustees sometimes who are usually club members. And we're also encouraging, all clubs are encouraged to have a club foundation representative. That's a person that just kind of keeps the foundation's good work in front of everybody on a quarterly basis or something there. So, and I should mention here that not all clubs have all these positions filled. And in some clubs, more than one person, a person holds more than one title in the club. but this is typically the way how clubs are structured in the US. Let's talk about club meetings and activities. The board meetings are usually held once a quarter, although there's several Serra clubs that hold them once a month. The member meetings are usually held twice a month, and they kind of break into two categories. One is a more formal program meeting. Usually there's a guest speaker who's going to speak on the topic of vocations, and usually that happens about the third week of the month. The other meeting is much less formal. It's on a first Friday or a first Saturday right after Mass, and there's an informal gathering, although the president's usually there to share some information about club activities. But it's also just a time for Serrans to chat and to develop fellowship there. Then, in addition to the member meetings, there are special annual events that Serrans are encouraged to attend. And oftentimes these take the place of a program meeting because they're pretty big events. And they kind of fall into 5 categories here. There's a lot of clubs do something connected with the ordination mass at the cathedral. A lot of priests have a lot of clubs have a priest appreciation dinner. They have a bishop's appreciation dinner. They can have a sister's appreciation event, and they have either a seminarian lunch or dinner to get to know the seminarians. Now, again, not all clubs do all these things, but almost all clubs do some of these things as a way to meet the second prong of our mission statement, which is to affirm and support existing priesthood and religious vocations. This club might interest you. I was in Serra for 10 years before I realized that our club was not like every other club in terms of how it raises money and finances its activities. There are really kind of 4 categories, although 99% of the clubs fall in the first 2 here. The first one is the one my club, the Des Moines, Iowa club, uses, and it's low dues. And then each Serran pays their meal costs based on actual usage and attendance. So we have the advantage of having monthly programs at places where it might be next to a hospital cafeteria or a cafeteria in an insurance company. People go in and buy their own lunch, who attend. They can buy, I usually get a cup of hot tea. Some people get a full lunch. It's whatever they want, but basically they're in charge of paying for their meal costs. And that's about 2/3 of the clubs in Serra that do it that way. Then there's another group of clubs that charges very high dues, but the club pays all the meal costs. And I think this is true of the Omaha clubs. I know for sure that they do this. Their dues might be in the $300 and $400 category for a year. But when you get what you get for that is all the meals during the year. And I think that the thought is if people pay, they're more likely to attend. There's a debate on that, whether that works. Most clubs have kind of decided whatever works for them is what they're going to do, but just be familiar that that's an option there. Then there are 2 other categories I just mentioned to show you there's some interesting things going on out there. We have one club that charges no dues at all, but they cover all their expenses through a fundraising effort. And if you can believe it, the fundraising effort is selling cinnamon buns. They must be good and they must sell a lot of them if they can pay all those dues. And then we have one club that basically ran into a problem with people that couldn't afford it. And what they did is they don't charge dues, but they send out a suggested amount. And that amount would be what we would typically call the dues that it takes to run the club for a year or 6 months, whatever they're looking at there. And then they ask people to give whatever you can. And what happens is that there are some pretty generous Serrans who can pay more and do pay more. And there are usually a few Serrans that can't quite afford the full suggested amount. And so they get covered or subsidized by those other donations. So this is all from a club survey that we did in January of 2021, trying to figure out how clubs operate financially. But a lot of interesting ideas there. Now I'm going to show you a slide that's a little bit what I call off book. These are some membership concepts that address 2 issues. One is where you have somebody who is willing to make a financial contribution but unwilling to commit the time to Serra. We call those friends of Serra. And the other is a group of people who, for whatever reason, it could be health or financial reasons, they want to do the work of Serra, but they can't afford the dues. So in either case, what happens is clubs adjust to put those people on as if they were members, but officially they are not Serra members. Let me go back to Friends of Serra and just talk about that for a second. I know one club in Iowa where I was district governor. Every year, their bishop sends out a letter to 100 well-to-do parishioners in the diocese, asking each of those people to make a $100 contribution to the Serra Club to help finance their vocations work. And they've had incredible success with that. I think they usually get between $6,000 and $8,000 a year. And they tell people what they do with that as part of that letter, but they put together poster boards that go in the back of churches in the gathering space that have pictures of all the seminarians and a little bit of information about the seminary they're going to and their year in seminary. And then they also have little cards called they look like a baseball card, sort of, with a picture of the seminarian and the seminarian, maybe a birth date, usually not the year, but the month and the day. And people can take those home and pray with those if they want to. So that's how that one club uses that money. They do 77 of those boards for 77 parishes, all the parishes in their diocese. So that's one way. And then the emeritus members, there are some people that it gets too tough to pay the dues. And so what we do is we just leave those people on the mailing lists and the newsletter lists. They're invited to all the prayer functions. And this works pretty well if you're in that first category of clubs that's low dues and the user pays the meal costs. It doesn't work so well if you're in the one that has the high dues and the club pays all the meal costs. That's a little bit tougher to make this work. But basically, the long and the short is that these people support Serra with their work, either their time or their money, but they are not officially Serrans. And for that reason, they have no dues obligation to either the U.S. Council or Serra International for the club. And just a caveat, this is a way a lot of clubs just adjust, but you can't overuse this because then there's no support for the above the club level events that take place. But I want you to be aware of them. Like I said, these are not, you won't find these in the bylaws anywhere. You won't find them in the Serra Constitution. They're just concepts that have evolved over time to deal with people in these two categories. Okay, here's some other thoughts on officers. This is my recommendation, always has been, but really I'd like clubs to consider 2-year terms for the key officer positions. The reason for that is that I went through, I was vice president of vocations, vice president of communications, and president. Every one of them was just a stiff learning curve for me. We had just 1-year terms. And so when I became president, I agreed to stay on an additional term, an initial year as part of my term, because I'd already been through the learning curve. And it just seems like kind of a waste for people to learn everything and then to find out that that all goes for naught and somebody else is going to start going through the same learning curve again. So think about 2-year terms for key officers. I do want to put a caveat on that. We don't like officers to stay in positions for more than 4 years. It's especially important for club presidents not to lock up the president position. A lot of club presidents have a hard time finding somebody to take their position, but they shouldn't. They should just say, I'm done, and somebody's going to have to step up and do it, because it really blocks all the new ideas and the way that things work in a club if one person stays in a position forever. The other exception to that is if you is the treasurer, and if you have somebody that deals with IT, like websites and stuff. Those are very technical skills, and usually I tell treasurers you're in the job for life. And same for IT people, because again, those are technical skills. They're hard to find. You don't want to turn those over. Once you get them working, you want to leave them just working if you can, and that usually has worked well for clubs. A second caution is don't throw new members into officer roles too quickly. I think this is one of the major mistakes that clubs make. They see fresh meat and everybody's tired of what they're doing, and they say, you'd make a great president, and they step in not knowing what the job really is or how the club works. It's not fair to the individuals, I don't think, because they're not trained, they don't know the information, and frankly, most of them burn out and then drop out of Serra at some point later on. And it's not fair to the club because you're not getting people that know how things have operated, have a history with the club. So don't throw people into new positions immediately. Now, that's not to say we don't want to engage them in something. So I'd say having them be on a committee is a great thing for a person to do, or have somebody be involved in one of the appreciation events. And then finally, as a goal, try to identify the new officers for the next year by April. That's usually before they're going to take over, but our leadership training needs to take place before the officers step into their new roles. This leadership training you're going through right now. So it's a good goal to identify new officers by April. Okay. Now we're going to go through some key officer responsibilities here, and I'll try to speed this up a little bit. I won't read every line or every word, but this is primarily a focus on the president's responsibility, although you're going to hear a lot of responsibilities for the vice presidents here too. But these are the things, kind of a checklist for the president, I think, to make sure these things are being done by somebody or that's assigned. So, the most important thing for the president is to make sure that all the officers act as a team. What we don't want is a bunch of solo players trying to accomplish our mission. And we'll talk about why that's important here in a second. But you need a team. You need everybody involved in this thing and together, knowing what's going on. A second important thing, and we've really encouraged this in the last 5 years, is to inform and involve the bishop and the vocations director, particularly in your annual program planning. What I recommend, and we'll see this a little bit later, is send the bishop a letter, tell him what we did the prior year, including all the spiritual stuff, how many hours of adoration, how many rosaries are being prayed, how many masses, and then tell him the speakers you had, and then ask the bishop and the vocations directors for ideas on the upcoming year. And if you got part of your program done, share that with them, but get them involved. They're part of the team, and they can't be a good part of the team if they don't know what we're doing. You got to engage all club members in some activity. Be sure to ask them to do something. And I like that something to be one of the vocations activities within the club. And I'll talk about what those are. We want to encourage members to participate in the above the club level events, the rally, the international conventions. And if you have regional conventions, those are wonderful ways to kind of meet people from other clubs and see what's going on all over the area there. Keeping the Serra portal updated is, I think, a lot easier now that we have a new portal, and we just had training this week for portal training for administrators. And finally, this last point seems kind of trivial, but I think it's underestimated in terms of its importance. Try to exude the joy that comes from doing God's work, as a president. It's important. Sometimes I think Serrans we don't smile enough, and we don't let people know the joy we feel from the things that we do. So from here on, we're going to talk in more specifics about a few of these. These first next two slides are just basically showing you why a team is important. The vocations vice president, he depends on communications if he wants to get participation in parish vocations activities. And the vocations person depends on the membership to try and engage the new members when they come in. Membership depends on vocations to create awareness of Serra in parishes. So it isn't like a membership responsibility, but if we have vocations activities in parishes, people are going to know what Serra is and how it works. They depend on communications to inform all the new members of club events and activities. And then the programs, they depend on them to retain new members by having quality programs. And the treasurer is there to finalize membership and notify when there's members leaving. Communications depends on programs. Obviously, you could be the best communications person in the world, but if you don't have a program to present to your people, you're not going to be able to communicate anything meaningful. And we have too many clubs, I think, that are in this situation where their programs roll from month to month. They don't get out there enough in advance to have people put it on their calendars. You can see that communications depends on vocations and membership as well. Programs depends on communications, obviously, to get the program events publicized and to get all of the officers with the timely planning. And then the treasurer is really key to a lot of things, but basically, he's the one that sort of generates the email list for communications and make sure that membership gets completed with the Chicago office. So here's kind of a president's checklist for programs. The most important thing I think that a president can do, other than guaranteeing teamwork, is to, I'm going to try and eliminate a block here. The most important thing that a president can do, other than teamwork, making sure that people aren't operating in silos, is to generate a master schedule for monthly meetings for the entire year in advance. And that's not the responsibility of the program's vice president. It needs to be the whole officer team that's involved in setting that annual schedule. The speakers should be identified and the topics identified and on mission. And again, as opposed to these rolling schedules or rolling programs that are, well, who should we have next month? The problem is if you wait that long, really good speakers' schedules are filled up by the time you ask. But if you take time in the summer and in August, for example, and call somebody and say, could you be a speaker for us in November or January or February, you got a lot better chance of finding an opening on their schedule and that they're willing to do that. If you're going to do this, you got to coordinate it with the bishop's schedule. You got to know what events you're going to have the bishop be a part of. And usually that means getting hold of his secretary as a very first step to find out if those dates will work. If you have appreciation events, you want to make sure that you have all the responsibilities assigned, the same for national awareness events. And then there are special events to be sure that you have to have some responsibility assigned to make sure they get done well. That would be the ordination mass, if you have an annual retreat, if you have seminary visits, or if you have a mass for deceased Serrans. So that's kind of a checklist for the president. And again, those things might be done a lot by the program's vice president, but the president's job is to make sure that somebody is assigned to get those things done. Just on programs, I think a lot of clubs struggle with, if they've been in existence for a while, they struggle with the question of, you know, we've asked all the priests we know to talk about their vocation story. Where do we go for new program speakers that are interesting? And I've tried to put together here just some two columns. One is possible speakers, and the other is possible topics. And you could really mix and match these any way you want. But I would say that vocation stories are interesting, but at a certain point, you're going to run out of them. So you need to find other things to talk about. And let's go down the possible speakers. Obviously, the bishop's a great speaker. The vocations director is usually a great speaker once a year to tell you how the vocations efforts are looking, how many people we have in the pipeline, how many seminarians we have. Local priests, sisters, and deacons are great people to call on. Seminarians make great speakers at meetings. Serrans just love to hear seminarians talk, not only about their calling, but also what they're doing as a seminarian. Parents of seminarians are usually all fired up. They're great people to have. Ordered priests are often overlooked because of the diocesan priesthood focus that we have, but ordered priests, if you have them in your area, they're great to talk, come and talk. Focus ministers, that's these young kids that go to college campus for 2 years. They're great to come in, and Focus has been just a great source of vocations for the church. I heard it said that there's 5,000 seminarians in seminary, and at any one time, 500 of those were Focus ministers. So a close connection with Focus ministers is a great possible speaker. School principals, Catholic school principals, obviously, RE directors. Here's one that I think a lot of clubs overlook, Knights of Columbus. Almost all Knights of Columbus have a vocations vice president. And I think it would be great to have them come once a year to a Serra meeting to share what they're doing and also to hear what we're doing so that we can coordinate between the two of us our vocations efforts. Missionaries, you know, it used to be missionaries are kind of forgotten about because they're in other countries, but now we have Zoom and we have GoToMeeting. And so it's not impossible to contact a local missionary headquarters, say we'd like to have somebody talk to us. The real key is to figure out some way to do it so that the time works for everybody. Diocesan newspaper editors, club member panels, and then don't forget about U.S. Serra council officers like myself. I go around and talk to a lot of clubs. They just call and ask if I can come and give an update or talk on a specific subject, and I'm glad to do that. And almost all of our officers are willing to do that. Then possible topics. Vocation stories is obvious, but you're going to run out of those. We had a club that one year defined that they're going to spend the whole year with speakers talking about their personal prayer life. And what it let them do was go back to a lot of the priests and sisters that they had talk about their vocation story and say, I wonder if instead you could come this time and just describe your personal prayer life. And they said it was one of the best years they ever had in terms of and what the speakers liked it too, because it was something different that they didn't usually get a chance to talk about. How to ask, that's how to invite somebody to consider a vocation. That's usually a talk that can be given by the vocations director. How to pray in adoration, the subject of forgiveness, what is spiritual direction, because that's an important part of the influencer and discernment, discerning a call. What makes a good confession? What's your organization doing to promote vocations? Reports on seminary visits, the call to holiness programs, which there are some great ones out there right now. A day at a seminary, you might have one of the seminarians talk by Zoom about what goes on in a day. And life at the Pontifical North American College in Rome, almost every diocese has somebody there. We've had some great programs where the kids, the seminarians there have agreed to come on. It must be midnight their time to talk about what a day looks like for them there. But there's a lot of good ideas there. So I probably spent too much time on that. Just realize there's a lot more opportunities than you might think. Okay, President's Checklist. Let's shift over to vocations. And I think that the most important thing here for the president is to make sure that every Serran in the club is involved in at least one vocation activity. You know, not an officer position, not anything else, but a vocation activity. And we've talked about there are activities that take place within the club. Those are the ones that we'd like somebody to participate in. The easy ones are a weekly or a monthly rosary. Adoration, Adopt a Seminarian is very popular. We talked about 7 Serran programs and the Newman Ministry. And then there are vocations outreaches to parishes that people can get involved with. And some of those duplicate. We talked about the seminarian prayer boards and cards. There's a called by name program, traveling chalice, traveling crucifix, and traveling St. Junipero Serra statues and parish schools and RE programs, and the National Vocations Awareness events. But get everybody involved in at least one vocations activity there. Let's look at membership. Again, this is the president's checklist. It's just important to remember that awareness is critical to membership. If people don't know that Serra exists or what we're about, they're not going to join. And so awareness is really created by the vocations activities of the club in parishes. That's how people get to know us. And then inviting new members is everyone's responsibility. It's not just the vice president of membership. And what a lot of clubs do is they have special events, usually involving the bishop. That's a big plus to invite prospects to come and learn about Serra. Make sure that when Serrans join, you have a new member induction ceremony that involves either the bishop, the vocations director, or your club chaplain. And then don't forget about member retention. Sometimes we get people in and we just forget. There's really 3 keys here. One is to inform them, and you do that through a new member orientation. There's one recorded online that can be shown. It takes about 36 minutes. And good communications. Let them know what's going on. Probably the most important one I would say is this welcome. You know, it's a combination of small things, but has big impact. But you know, I was in my club for 2 years, and I just couldn't put names and faces together. And finally, we got a new president, and she started every meeting by having every single person, not just the new people, but every single person just go around the room, say their name, their parish, and how long they've been in Serra. And that was really the first time that I got a chance to put names and faces together there. But friendship is really important. We need to go out of our way to be friends to these new people and make them feel a sort of a warm welcome. And then we've already talked about this, but engaging them in one vocations activity, maybe adopt a seminarian, maybe a monthly rosary for vocations. Then communications within the club. I think those are pretty obvious. If you have a directory, that's great, especially if you have your program schedule laid out for the whole year. Put those 2 together. They make a great package for people. You got monthly newsletters, email reminders, websites, and you got to keep an accurate member email list. That's really important. And then communications needs to be conscious of outside the club too, to the broader Catholic community. And that's done through bulletin announcements, Catholic newspapers, and Catholic radio and websites. And then the treasurer, Treasurers are often overlooked, but treasurers play a critical role. I'm just going to focus on a couple of things here that might not be apparent, but treasurers financially, in addition to the transactions and the reporting and budgeting and the check writing, records retention usually falls to the treasurer. So we ask treasurers to keep 5 years of records. And a very important one is to have a second signature on all bank accounts. I'll tell you why this is important. We had a club that the treasurer developed Alzheimer's, basically couldn't help us at all. And that club couldn't get access to their bank account for 6 months. It took that long to get things straightened out with the bank so that they could get access to the funds that they had. So make sure you got a second signature on all accounts. There's the annual tax filing for nonprofit status. That's extremely easy now. If you need guidance on that, we have some people that can help. Just give a call. Portal maintenance is keeping the membership list up to date and also who the current officers are so that we can email them. And finally, an audit. It's suggested that every club do an audit every year. I would just tell you that I don't think that's practical. What I recommend is that every board meeting that the treasurer bring an exact copy of the bank statement to the board meeting and pass it around so everybody can see it. The reason that's important is because we had a club, this is about 10 years ago, where the treasurer kept saying there was about $5,000 in the bank account, and then he would go through what activity had been since the last meeting. Well, he got into a health problem and somebody had to take over, and it turns out there was $500 in the bank account. And there have been some inappropriate uses of funds. I'm happy to say that the family was able to make up that, and that there was no money lost at by the club itself. But I think, you know, a lot of the financial reports start with, here's what's in the bank account. And if you know everything, if you know what's going on, otherwise, knowing that is it's just a good way to do kind of an informal audit. Okay, we talked about involving the bishop and the vocations director. So here's 3 points. 1, don't overwhelm the bishop with a whole bunch of people. I'd say the president, maybe the district governor, maybe a president-elect. And what I would do is I would send a 2-page letter, 1 page that says what we have done, 1 page that says what we're planning to do, and ask if he has any advice, and then ask for a face-to-face meeting with the bishop every year. Ask for 20 minutes to a half an hour. And don't read the summary, just ask the bishop. He'll read it, and he'll give you his input and recommendations. I would tell you that this has been used more widely here recently, and both the bishops and the clubs have benefited tremendously from this. So I really encourage you to do this. And then engage all members. Ask, you know, be sure to ask. And when you ask, don't ask them for a general thing. Ask them for a specific limited task, because people are more willing to say yes to that. And ask them individually, not in a group. There's one particular program that's used called Count on Me, and the clubs that use it, it's a 1-page single-space list of all the little tasks that happen during the year in a club. It might be taking pictures of new members. It might be sending prayer cards for widows or widowers of Serrans. It could be a whole bunch of things, but basically they're allowed to check off things they'd like to do. And then that comes back to one person. Usually there's a self-addressed stamped envelope. Comes back to one person who loads it into a spreadsheet. And the spreadsheet has the members down the left column, and across the top are all the activities. And they're broken up into the 4 vice president categories. And then once those are all collected, that's shared with the vice president, so the vice presidents can see what people are willing to do what tasks. Okay, that's a quick view of club operations and leadership. Any questions or comments there? Okay, we've got just a little bit more to cover here. This first session is the one that's always packed with everything. Strategic planning, you know, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I think that a lot of you know that Serra has recently engaged in strategic planning. There is a strategic plan that's been drafted for the U.S. Council. It's been submitted to Serra International for approval, and I think that district governors have been encouraged to share that with all the clubs. It's far more than just the clubs, but it's a great roadmap for clubs to follow. So take a look at that. One of the critical things is don't set too many goals. You know, I think a lot of clubs decide they're going to do everything. Pick 2 or 3 things and do them well. I think that's really critical. So, okay. Event planning calendar. I used to do one of these for all the clubs in the central region. I don't think we have one currently, but basically there's two things you want to do here. It's a calendar that runs two columns. The left column is usually all the events you're going to have, the dates by month. But the right column are the things that have to be done for planning for those. And usually what it does is it takes the events and backs them up 3 months and starts to say, you need to start planning for this event and this event and this event. So, and then what you want to collect on there is everything you possibly can, all the diocesan events like ordination masses. You want to do all the U.S. church events. You want to do the universal church calendar. And you want to make sure that it covers at least a year so that people can see things like when does Christmas fall, when does Easter fall, so you're not having programs or meetings that are scheduled on those dates. Last subject here. Thank you for sticking with me this long. I want to talk for a second about the Eucharistic Congress. We are a major supporter of the Eucharistic Congress this year. It's going to be held July 17th to the 21st. Because of our support, 50 religious orders have gotten free booths to be at the Eucharistic Congress. And it's going to be in Indianapolis. And Serra is going to have a special day there on July 19th. We have a presentations and a breakout session, and that's followed by a Serra get-together. We've had over 1/3 of our local clubs donate funds to help sponsor our participation, and it's going to be in Indianapolis. So, but July 19th would be the key date if you can only attend one date. Otherwise, we'd like to see you attend the whole thing.
Mike, what is your lead time for if we asked you to come speak at one of our, for instance, one of our travel meetings where we're trying to increase our membership? What kind of time slots do you usually work within? How would we work that?
You know, I'm actually pretty flexible, and I think a lot of the officers are, with the exception that I think you'd find a lot of us don't like to. I usually like to drive if I can. So I don't like to travel in December, January, or February just because of bad weather. But if I get outside that, those 3 months, I'm usually pretty good to go. Gino DiMatteo is taking over the programs vice president. That's one of the things I'd like to see us do there is a better job of keeping like a speakers bureau that clubs could call on. So we'll do that.
That'd be awesome.
I just wanted to address Anna's question about how the funds are used from the foundation. The best place to find that is in the Serra magazine. There's an annual report that covers all that, and also the serrafoundation.org. You can find archives on that.
That's a good comment. And I might mention, if you remember that tab I mentioned before, serraus.org, leadership.
Yeah.
Club officers, district governors. I get asked that all the time. They like to know who the grants went to and how much. And I think I've got something under there for the Serra International Foundation grants for the last couple of years, just the list.
Got it.
But you're right about the foundation. They're usually the 4th edition of the Serra magazine is the foundation report. So.
Right, and applications don't start on that for anybody that wants to know until August, and they end September 30th.
Okay, now that's something I didn't know. I figured you could make them all year long.
No.
Okay, great to know.
They don't even offer the information until then because there's stipulations and there's a questionnaire you have to fill out. So. Okay.
We've run pretty long, and I appreciate everybody. If you want to send me an email with a question, you're welcome to. Again, my email is Mike, M-I-K-E, Downey, D-O-W-N-E-Y, at Downey, DOWNEY.com. And I'll try to answer anything you got there offline there. So, okay, I'm going to stop the recording.